kann zwar eine Art von Deutsch, aber das will ich euch alle nicht antun. So I'm going to actually have to stand down here, so it's going to be a little bit of Wizard of Oz kind of thing. Pay attention to the great and powerful Oz and ignore the man behind the screen. I have, oh yes, just one thing about the company. It is .net, not .com. If you go looking for it, and most of my articles since the beginning of 2017 on customer experience and/or the GDPR are available there. I have 74 slides in the next 24 and a half minutes, so I'd better get started. 66 million years ago, an asteroid about the size of Mount Everest and traveling at 72,000 kilometers per hour slammed into the Earth off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, and it forever changed the course of life on the planet. In a misguided attempt to localize my presentation, I've depicted the dinosaurs as Goethe and Grüne Soße. Not yet 11 years ago, another object about half the size of a pack of cigarettes and traveling at the speed of a Steve Jobs keynote presentation began to emerge from stores in North America. And while Steve Ballmer and the CEOs of Nokia, RIM, and Sony Ericsson literally laughed at it, it began slowly but inexorably, and we now know inevitably, to fundamentally change the course of life on the planet. 66 million years ago, the so-called Chicxulub impact, which I admit sounds like an ill-advised merger between KFC and Jiffy Lube, produced a crater 180 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers deep. It ejected debris into the atmosphere that blocked out the sun, causing darkness, destruction, and death. In contrast, the iPhone impact, or maybe we should say the smartphone impact, or the advent of ubiquitous computing, but let's give credit where it is due, the iPhone impact released knowledge that parts the clouds. It produces, most of the time, light and enlightenment, and it powers a profound and unprecedented shift from information scarcity to information superabundance. So as Mike Aruz says, as the Industrial Revolution was defined by radical efficiency in production, the digital revolution is defined by radical efficiency in information transformation. It's hard to exaggerate how profound this transition is. People compare it to the advent of steam power or the advent of electricity or the shift from an agricultural to an industrial economy. However you figure it, whatever proxy you use to understand it, the important thing is that we know very well that whenever there is a significant and profound shift in an environment, then the inhabitants of that environment have to adapt or expire. And from the perspective of all of us as consumers, we are precisely adapting to this changed environment. So prolonged use of touch screens actually rewires your brain. We know that millennials regularly say they prefer their phones to sex. This could have devastating effects on the future of the species. And Microsoft scientists have proven beyond a doubt that the human attention span is now less than that of fish sticks. Fischstäbchen, meine Damen und Herren. Aber, yeah, perhaps I wasn't focused when I read the article. Nevertheless, I think all this means that we need to rethink how we think of consumers. We tended to think of consumers just as those people who are future potential buyers of our stuff, like this devoted mother who's buying a selection of frozen dinners and a bottle of ketchup for her family. But we should rather think of consumers like this, not as teenage girls necessarily, but as constantly connected, constantly hungry beasts that can never get enough information. So I put it this way: consumer has changed from a noun to a verb, from a kind of thing to a state of being. And this consumer is voracious, insatiable, omnivorous, and what they consume is content, and it doesn't really matter whether, perhaps unfortunately, whether that content is educational and informational and enlightening or merely entertaining and trivial and time-wasting. So, if we as consumers have adapted relatively quickly and relatively happily to the environmental changes, what about the sellers? What about the other side of the equation? That is all of you in one way or another as well. And from a company or brand perspective, we face a double challenge because we not only have to adapt to the new environment of information superabundance, and so many business models were based upon choke points around the flow of information, but we also have to adapt, and this is the bigger challenge, to the new behaviors and expectations and demands of those changed consumers. So in short, is customer experience management a possible extinction level event for companies? This is probably a strange and perhaps offensive question to ask at an event dedicated to customer experience in front of an audience of customer experience professionals and uttered by a self-described customer experience analyst and expert. And there is in fact lots of evidence that we are making good progress. So customer experience has been a top C-level priority for years, or at least they say it is. There are, depending on how you look at it, an impressive or depressing number of companies that think they can help with customer experience. And we've been doing it for a long time, at least a decade and arguably 2 decades. But when we look at, when we shift our attention from what companies say they want to do or are trying to do or are actually achieving, we're no doubt going to hear today dozens of genuine, real success stories around customer experience where one or more of you have moved the needle and changed the business by the impact of a customer experience initiative. But when we ask not the companies and the teams, but ask the consumers about the quality of their customer experience, then unfortunately, it turns out we suck. We really suck. There is no suckometer large enough to measure the degree of our suckosity. So for example, in 2013, we found 87% of firms in the global survey have had CX initiatives fail in the last 3 years. This should be good news, because everybody has told you, and you've probably told yourself, that you must adopt a spirit of experimentation. And it is the nature of experimentation that sometimes they fail. If they don't, you're not doing it right. So failure is the price we pay for progress in this area or in any area. There's only one problem. We're not making any progress. And this is demonstrated over and over again in consumer surveys at a regional or global scale. For example, Capgemini's annual survey that they conduct worldwide. Accenture's, I'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow in the context of the GDPR, but most clearly, most obviously, Forrester's famous Customer Experience Index. So this is the way it works. They survey tens of thousands of consumers about their experiences, their memories, their attitudes about brands, and they run them through their various algorithms, and they come up with a rating or a ranking that runs from excellent to very poor, or the other way. The important thing to realize here is that okay in the middle is not like, we're doing okay. It's mediocre. You do not want to be just okay in the Forrester CXI. So in 2015, Forrester ran the US CXI twice. They published the reports once in January, I think, and once in October. And in the 6 to 8 months between those two surveys, it turned out that the number of firms with a good rating declined by almost half. 2.3% of all the firms improved in those 6 or 8 months. Nearly 30% got worse. And overall, 1% of all US brands were rated excellent. That's 3 out of 300 brands. In comparison, however, the US is killing it because in the 2017 EU survey, 0 European brands rated excellent. In Germany, 83% are mediocre or worse. In the UK, twice as many declined in comparison to 2016 as improved. And in France, who's here from France? 100% of the firms are mediocre or worse. No one even ranks good in France. In short, I think the evidence is compelling that customer experience management from the perspective of the customers has so far failed. Faced with the greatest challenge in the business environment, I think, since the onset of the Industrial Revolution, nearly every company has been unable to successfully adapt, at least so far. And the question is, why? Why is it so hard to improve customer experience? I will say somewhat facilely, because we do too little and we try to do too much. I won't even read the next line. We do too little for CXM in the sense that we tend to deploy numerous and varied software solutions to produce and support numerous and varied and fragmented and disconnected experience, which of course largely reflect our organizational silos and divisions, i.e. separate teams responsible for the website, email marketing, mobile app development, customer support, the physical store, et cetera, et cetera. We still tend to emphasize the efficiency of our efforts rather than thinking about the effect upon the customer per se. We emphasize channels over audiences and things over needs. I wonder why that is blank. Interesting. Okay, some of my images are not showing up, so this will be fun. There is a movie by Luc Besson called Lucy. Has anybody seen Lucy? It's a great movie. I watch it a couple of times a year. And in it, she basically has not superpowers exactly, but by accidentally ingesting a drug, she is able to use 100% of her brain power compared to our paltry 10 or 13% or something like that. And my suggestion is that ubiquitous computing has turned consumers into something like Lucy. But however, we tend to treat consumers still like something like Lucy, the little proto-human chimp-like ape that we think that we can distract by email offers for 20% off of the next bag of bananas. In short, put it this way, this is the Twitter moment. We practice customer experience management with too little attention to the customer's experience. The hashtag here is apostrophes matter. This is a problematic piece of advice in a country and a language that systematically abuses apostrophes. So maybe we could say, try to think instead of Kundenerlebnis, think of das Erlebnis des Kunden. And also, we practice customer experience with too little attention to the customer's experience in the singular. That is, we produce isolated and disconnected experiences, whereas the customer ultimately has one integrated experience, one overall impression of a company or brand. So singular nouns matter too. In short, as I think we've already heard this morning, digital marketing cannot possibly exhaust the effort behind customer experience, no matter what you hear from various vendors, okay? Here's a lovely picture of Clayton Christensen, and he says in this article from 2000, 20 years ago almost, very presciently entitled, Meeting the Challenge of Disruptive Change, understanding a problem is the most crucial step in solving it. And that sounds like kind of a banal statement. That's the kind of thing we all learn when doing math story problems in 3rd grade. Obviously, you need to understand the problem or you're not going to solve it correctly. But I think that Christensen is being very careful here. That means that in the first case, understanding the problem is essential, or you're not going to make any progress at all. But secondly, it's crucial, it's critical, in the medical sense of a critical condition. It could go either way. And that is, as we already heard this morning, you can think that you've understood the problem, you can set aside some time to understand the problem before trying to solve it, but you misunderstand it. And so you begin working on a solution that is the solution to the wrong problem. And my suggestion is that we've been working on the wrong problem insofar as one of our shortcomings is we try to do too much. So there's general agreement about the definition of customer experience. I don't think it's controversial anymore. Something like this: a customer's perception of a company or brand based on all of their interactions during the entire customer life cycle. So if that's what customer experience is, and we want to practice customer experience management, that must be the management of a customer's perception of a company or brand based upon all of their interactions during the entire customer life cycle. So this is disastrous that that I don't have this image, but just imagine what this means. If we think about it, that means that if you're practicing what I call this totalized customer experience management, you need to try to manage potentially thousands of interactions This is the perfectionism that the previous speaker was talking about. Thousands of interactions for a single individual that might stretch over the course of decades if you're lucky, if this is an ongoing relationship. And that's for one person. Then you need to try to do that for every one of your customers. And you need to try to do that for every one of your prospects that might become a customer. And you need to do it for every one of your segments and your locales and your languages. And you need to do it across every channel and touch point. And you need to do it in a way that is seamlessly multi-channel. And, by the way, at the end, you're actually, the end result is an impression in somebody's mind. It is a mental state. That, I suggest, oh, interesting. Oh, there it is. Oh, God. Okay. So, in short, if that is a good description of the effort behind what you would call totalized customer experience management, then the conclusion has to be customer experience management is impossible. It is mathematically impossible. It is psychologically impossible. You cannot manage mental states of your customers. It is practically impossible. That is, no company could possibly have the resources available to actually manage every one of those interactions. And if they did, it would probably be a waste of time. Fortunately, there is a better way. There is a way to avoid this mistake of misunderstanding the problem and the mistake of isolated and fragmented customer experiences. Because we know that we don't experience customer life cycles. We don't leave the house on a Saturday morning and say, you know what, I think I'm going to go out and move from the research phase into the pre-purchase phase. So instead of looking at these total and totalizing customer experiences, we should look at discrete, self-contained customer journeys. And there are so many presentations here in the next 2 days on customer journeys. I'll be curious to see if anyone agrees with me. Journeys are the way that we actually all get stuff done in our lives. So this McKinsey graphic illustrates how those customer journeys, luckily I think the images actually appear in the PDF. The McKinsey graphic illustrates how these customer journeys, they typically cut across the business silos. So you have like an onboarding journey, which I'll talk about in a moment and maybe even show you. So it cuts across the marketing, customer service, field technicians, and so on and so forth. So I know what those other illustrations were. Those were illustrations of the customer life cycle. So you get this long customer life cycle with all of these interactions and moments within it. Or even from, I think it's from Oracle, they have a customer life cycle that's actually an infinity sign, indicating truly how totalizing that effort can be. So a better visualization of customer experience management, in my view, is to think of it in terms of these waves, wave tops, and troughs. And the wave tops are these high-value customer journeys. They're high value in two senses. They're high value to you as a business because they harbor the greatest opportunity for whatever business value you want to get out of it. Probably revenue, maybe just reducing churn, so on and so forth. And they are high value for you because they're high value for the customers. They represent an inordinately large amount of the overall impression or memory that the customer is going to take away from that moment. So actually, this is only half of the illustration. But that means if you think of it in terms of these waves and troughs, then there also are going to be these moments where you'd better get it right. This is where I, as a consumer, am deeply invested in what's going to happen and making my job and my life as good as possible. But there are also these troughs where, frankly, they don't want to have anything to do with you. Once I switch my cable provider and it's working, I don't want my cable company to send me emails and call me on the phone until I'm ready to take another step, or unless I have a problem and there's issue resolution stage is opened up. Yeah, there we go. So this kind of figure or structure is effectively repeated within each high-value customer journey, because within a high-value customer journey, not all of the moments are of equal value. So you have hot spots within that customer journey that you also want to identify and focus on, because again, they have an undue influence on how the interaction is experienced and remembered by the customer. When you look at any business vertical like retail banking, there are often, or I would say almost always, a surprisingly small number of high-value customer journeys. So in retail banking, in accommodation or hotels, and again, the cable company onboarding journey. I like to use this example because pretty soon cable companies will no longer exist. So if you look at here, these are first of all, this journey begins when the research journey ends. I've already been through the research journey. I've already decided for some good or bad reasons that I'm going to sign up with Time Warner. Now the onboarding journey begins. And just look at the teams that are responsible here or involved in the stages or the steps within this journey. And so as I think, again, Mackenzie pointed out, every one of these teams could be doing an exemplary job. Every one of them could have a 95% satisfaction rating when they survey customers. But if you have 6 touch points and a 95% satisfaction rating, that means that 1/4 of all of your customers are dissatisfied with the overall customer journey that is made up of all of these things. So the suggestion is take members of the website team, the email marketing team, the call center, et cetera, and put them together into a customer journey team. Okay? Make them responsible for nothing but that journey. Then you achieve all kinds of great business benefits. So, you're told over and over again, you should break up silos. Why? Not why, okay, I kind of understand in the abstract silos are not great, but how are we going to know whether we're achieving any value out of it? How are we going to measure whether breaking up the silos has actually delivered anything to us? In the abstract, you can't, but if you break apart, not break up, but break apart the silos in that way and forming this customer journey team, you know very well whether you're achieving the effects that you want in terms of that journey. And you can determine where things like personalization, which we'll talk about more tomorrow, or something like a collaboration platform. Everybody should have a collaboration platform. Why? Because, I don't know, people like to work together. And then we can't measure it properly, and then it dies. But if we say we need some collaboration tools because we've determined that in this or that particular high-value customer journey, there is a gap in communication. The members of the team are not able to communicate effectively. If they had a collaboration tool, that would probably fill in that gap. That's why we need it. And we know exactly how to measure whether it had the effect that we wanted in the first place. So I'm almost done. The benefits of customer journey management, they are limited in number. Mackenzie says about 80% of the customer interactions are typically covered by a small number of such journeys. Data for relevance transactions are much easier to define and to deliver on. That's crucial in light of the GDPR. And they just correspond to the way in which customers interact with us. We care about a company or brand when we think that it can help us get a job done effectively, painlessly, with little effort, and so on and so forth, or as little effort as possible. And then we don't care about that company or brand anymore. It is, in short, I think everybody in Germany knows the Goldilocks story. Marketing-centric, touch-point-oriented customer experience management is too small. Totalized customer lifecycle management is too big. Customer journey management, I think, is just right, and it might be the one and only way to finally begin making progress with customer experience from the customer's perspective and avoiding extinction in this new environment. Thanks.
Thank you.